Hello and welcome. Today we've got Ryan Hartwig, Facebook whistleblower, and we are going to be discussing, obviously, the censorship on Facebook. He was a Facebook content moderator. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to our Telegram channels and to nicholasveniamin.com for my free email updates. And if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, I will leave the link below in the description for the full interview, unless, of course, myself and Ryan decide to choose our words wisely, then, due to the insane censorship, it's absolutely crazy. Ryan, thank you for joining me. How are you and what have you been up to?
Yeah, doing well, Nicholas. Thanks for having me on. And I've been busy doing interviews the last year and a half, talking about internet censorship, talking about what I did at Facebook as a content moderator. And as you might know, I filmed with a hidden camera for 9 months, went public last June with Project Veritas with some of those recordings. And since then, I wrote a book, which you can see on the wall behind me here, Behind the Mask of Facebook, which further documents that bias.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I'm so honored to have you. Thank you so much, Ryan. So if you'd like to give us a short presentation of your experience and the information that you'd like to share with the viewers, and then we can go ahead with some questions and answers, but try and work around the words due to the censorship if you can, so we can keep this on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks so much for having me on, Nicholas, once again. And so I went public last June, but my journey started in 2018. So in March of 2018, I started working as a contractor for Facebook. So I was working directly for Cognizant, and they're an IT company in the United States. And so they had a 3-year contract with Facebook. So that's what I got hired to do. I got hired to censor content online. I had to study Facebook's policies. So one at a time, I would have a piece of content appear on my screen. It could be a meme. It could be violent. It could be violent imagery. It could be cartels, terrorists. And I had to make a decision whether to delete that content or leave it on the platform. And so it was a lot of it was disturbing content. We even had to run across child pornography. And so from a mental health aspect, it was a difficult job. But then after I'd been there a year, I noticed some bias creeping in. And even the first summer I was there, Facebook made an exception to allow attacks against straight white males as filth for not supporting LGBT. And so that double standard I saw time and time again, whether it was dealing with abortion and Facebook's stance on abortion. Facebook does not consider abortion a violent death, or whether it's protecting certain celebrities or people on the left, like Alyssa Milano or Don Lemon, who's a news anchor for CNN. So Facebook has their rules, but they don't apply them, and they can make newsworthy exceptions anytime they like. So that was one of my biggest discoveries. But yeah, I documented in my book more than 40 examples of this bias, mainly against people on the right, against conservatives. So those are some of my big takeaways. That basically, Facebook really just, they're not. We already know this, but they're clearly biased. But they also have a global role in censoring content. And so we had election training decks in the UK that I had access to, in Canada, parts of Europe like Hungary. So pretty much every country in the world has an election training deck, and moderators in those countries have to follow Facebook's guidelines on elections. Mm-hmm. So those are just a few things that I discovered, but it's really astounding to read the book and just I have screenshots, like actual screenshots of when I filmed in the book. So that's a kind of a summary of what I uncovered.
Right. So let's talk about first of all, how long have you been working for Facebook, doing this job? Removing content.
Yeah, so I was there for just under 2 years. So I started March of 2018. And the project ended in February of 2020. So it ended, prior to the U.S. presidential election. Just shy of 2 years. And so it's been, so I was there for 2 years. And I started actually in the bilingual, I got the position as a bilingual moderator in Spanish and English. So I was moderating content initially in Latin America, and I'd get some US content, and then later transition to just North America. But I saw how Facebook dealt with, the 2018 Mexican presidential election, and also how they dealt with immigration and hate speech in South America, Venezuela, Peru, Colombia. So yeah, I was there for 2 years.
So are you saying that you was a contractor and you were specifically hired to censor? I want to be careful with my words, to silence people in what they're saying and information based on people's opinions that would support a presidential candidate that would not be that would be opposed by the other side. Is that what you were assigned to do?
That's correct. So, that's the key thing that led to a criminal referral. So I submitted some of my evidence to a congressman here in the United States, Congressman Matt Gaetz, and he submitted a criminal referral to the DOJ for Mark Zuckerberg. And that's because, Facebook was censoring political speech. So Zuckerberg testified in April of 2018 that they do not censor political speech, but my evidence proves that they do. So, for example, if at one point in time on Facebook, if I said keep Canadians out of the United States, or if I said keep Britons out of France, right? That phrase violates Facebook's hate speech policy for exclusion. So, like, even the most simplest things, like of discussing political immigration or immigration in general, it's almost impossible to talk about. If I'd say some people shouldn't be in my country or shouldn't be here, then Facebook disallows it. So that's one example of political speech. And I'm looking at this list, the long list of examples I have. They're talking about anytime Trump talked or gave a speech, they would label it as hate speech. So Trump would talk about the gangs, the cartels, MS-13 coming from Mexico. And Facebook kind of mirrored how the leftist media was talking about that in the US. And Facebook said, anytime that Trump speaks, look for hate speech. Even his State of the Union, the annual State of the Union address, where he addresses both the members of Congress, Facebook literally told us to look for hate speech coming from his State of the Union. So anything Trump says was a dog whistle, whether he was talking about South Africa or the one time he quoted, I forget the name he quoted in the UK. But yeah, it was clearly just basically Facebook was mirroring the leftist tactics of smearing Trump and smearing his supporters.
So when you got this job initially in the beginning, were you aware of the political narratives when you were hired?
Yeah, I was fairly aware of the political narratives. I was pretty up to date with politics, but as part of the job, you had to be aware of current events. You had to be aware of national figures, whether it's politics and also like rap artists. Because if someone gets attacked on social media and they're a public figure, you can allow more attacks against them. So you have to know the names of people. But yeah, I was very familiar with politics and everything going on. And so that's when after about a year there at Facebook, I started making a list of Facebook's exceptions. But yeah, the one thing that really jumped out at me was regarding abortion. So Facebook's internal policies, like we had to moderate content about abortion. So whether it was the imagery or people talking about abortion, and word for word, Facebook's policy says that advocating for killing babies / fetuses in an abortion context is not considered violence and incitement. So their policies just they mirror the people, the policies that the ideology from the left. Also, they had guidance that said that fetuses are not considered human. Stillborns are not considered as a premature death. So we would moderate types of violence or imagery. But, if I say, hey, I'm going to go kill someone tomorrow, like we would usually delete that if it was specific enough. But here they're saying, they're taking a stance on fetuses, on abortion. And on that same abortion theme, it's pretty interesting. So Alyssa Milano is a celebrity. don't know if you've heard of her, but she's a very outspoken advocate for people on the left. And there was an abortion law that was going to be passed in Alabama a couple of years ago, and she was advocating, for pro-choice, and that there shouldn't be additional restrictions on abortion, that abortion should be allowed. And so as part of that on social media, she said men should not be allowed to make laws about women's bodies. And that phrase actually violates Facebook's hate speech policy, because you're excluding men from the political process. Well, Facebook didn't like that, obviously, because that their laws, the rules should be applied uniformly, equally. And so Facebook said, we're going to make an exception. We're going to allow that phrase because, of course, it's Alyssa Milano. It's their favorite, celebrity on the left. So, and then the same thing happened with Don Lemon. Don Lemon said on air, on national television, Don Lemon said white males are terror threats. And Facebook said, look, we acknowledge that this violates Facebook's hate speech policy. We're making a newsworthy exception.
So this is not a question of men making rules with women's bodies. This is about making rules about, protecting babies' lives, because this goes against Christian values. It's a Christian country. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, we are a Christian country. I mean, there's that's ingrained in our values as Americans, and at the very least, even if they're not supporting Christian values, or Facebook's not respecting that, we have laws about the First Amendment where and that Facebook is a public square and they're restricting free speech. But yes, as a Christian country, Facebook is like they're taking a stance. They're picking sides, and it's political speech. So another double standard is Facebook's bullying policy. So if I call someone mean names on Facebook, there's a way to take those down, and especially if a minor is reporting them. But if I call someone a Trump humper versus a feminazi, so if I say, Nick, hey, you're a Trump humper, meaning like you're a Trump supporter, but I'm attacking you because of your support for Trump. Even if you report it, and there's what's called a name and face match, so you yourself report it. So I, as a moderator, would see, hey, Nick reported this comment. That gives me greater latitude to delete it. But even with that, I cannot delete Trump humper. It stays up no matter what. There's no way to take it down. You could report it like a million times and it stays up. But if I call you a feminist, like a feminist Nazi, then that does get deleted. So a leftist who gets attacked for being a feminist gets more protections than someone who supports Trump. And then we talked about in my book. My book is Behind the Mask of Facebook. I talk about Greta Thunberg. So Greta Thunberg is the darling of climate activism, and she was being attacked on Facebook as well, and she was being called retarded or retarded, and this is when she was still a minor. And so Facebook made an exception to the rule and to give her greater protections. So they literally scoured all the intranet, Facebook's internet, and had us delete any mention of retarded. So for an entire week, all I was deleting was attacks on Greta Thunberg.
So when you said that you were fully aware of the political narratives at the time when you were hired and you were doing this job, what made you stay there to continue censoring?
Yeah, so I was very politically aware of trends when I got hired there, and so even in my training class, one of my trainers was talking about how much she loved President Obama, and so that kind of gave me an inkling of what I would experience. But what made me stay there was like my civic duty. So I felt like my civic duty as a patriot, as an American, was to let people know what was going on. Because it's not just censoring of conservatives, it's censoring of Americans, and it's censoring of people throughout the world. And so, yeah, after about a year, I made a list of about 19 examples. I wrote a letter to a few congressmen and politicians here in the United States. I didn't hear back. So at that point, I reached out to Project Veritas, a journalist organization here in the United States. And I volunteered to film with a hidden camera. They sent me a camera. So I filmed for about 9 months total. But I just feel like of all the platforms, if you have a platform with 3 billion people, it should be very transparent. I didn't see transparency. And and there's been other whistleblowers as well that have come forward. But I'm more of I approach it more of from a libertarian perspective. I don't think the internet should be regulated as much, and Facebook is attempting to kind of hijack the internet in a way, and it's kind of a global takeover of social media, of the internet.
So we know that if you've got a big platform like Facebook or any other platform, and you're doing really well, and it's got billions of users, it's most likely you'll be intervened by these corrupt politicians, but they want to get involved and try and work around how they can have it their way. So people who most people would believe whatever the narrative is when you have it constantly repeated like that. So who do you think is actually behind this? Behind the Facebook, taking down content without using that word? Yeah,
that's a good question. So people ask, like, what are Mark Zuckerberg's motives? Is someone controlling him? And there's a lot to be said. I mean, if you have, I'll just say this. One theory is that Mark Zuckerberg had good intentions going into this. He created a social media platform, but maybe more powerful people intervened and offered him, offered to make him a lot more money, and then maybe he made a deal with them, and maybe they're the ones pulling the strings. But yeah, that interaction between politicians and Facebook is interesting, because here in the United States, we had before this last year, after the election, after the November 3rd event, after the presidential election, we had a sitting senator, Cory Booker, call for Facebook and Twitter to delete Trump from their platform. And about a month later, Facebook did that. They, deplatformed President Trump while he was in office. So that has implications where Facebook doesn't have any oversight. They supposedly have an oversight board, but who regulates Facebook? And I don't think should the government regulate them. I don't know if I'm a fan of that either. But when you have one company controlling so much of the internet, it's definitely vulnerable to, I guess, takeovers from people on a global level. Call it, you can call it what you want, but is there a group of people maybe controlling Facebook? There might be, and it seems to be that there's a narrative they're trying to push, and I definitely documented that narrative where they're pushing leftist policies, but they have influence not only in the U.S. but also globally over elections.
Do you have any data as to how many have left Facebook till now?
That's a good question. So I don't know exactly. I mean, right now the current estimate of users is about 3 billion, but Facebook, they also own Instagram and WhatsApp, and I think in the UK, you guys recently prevented an acquisition by Facebook, which is good, because we need, here in the US, our antitrust legislators are not doing their job and in trying to break up Facebook and Google and all these duopolies, these monopolies and duopolies. But I'm sure there's been some attrition. There's been people leaving Facebook, and right now there's a lot of open space in that in the area of social media. So you have platforms like Gab, you have platforms like Bastion, which is blockchain. Also, Sovereign is another blockchain social media platform. So that's great. I think there should be more options for consumers. There shouldn't just be one platform that controls and dictates everything on the internet. And so, yeah, we're moving forward. I think I'm actually somewhat pessimistic about the future of the internet, but free speech is a human rights issue. I think we should be able to talk about things and not be censored, but we're experiencing that to a very strong degree. Now Facebook is influencing government. So now they're working hand in hand to censor their citizens. So Facebook is a great tool if you're a dictator or if you're a tyrannical government. Facebook is great.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan Hartwig, it's been an absolute honor to have you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
The last thing I want to say is just you look at blockchain as the future for social media, and be sure to check out my book online at Behind the Mask of Facebook. It's available on alternative bookstores or anywhere on the internet. And thanks so much for having me on.
I'd happily love to put the link below so that people can have a look at your book. Thank you so much, Ryan. We'll speak very soon. Bye-bye.